beautiful tile treatment on the fireplace, because one of the things Tiffany did is develop a process for coloring the glass, which was luminous glass. And the decoration on the ceiling resembles what I've shown you in the English country houses of the Renaissance. And this is just to show you at a distance. Now there is either larger tables, or this room is very often set up for meetings. There is another room that's been restored. If you haven't been there, there's another room that just opened up or is about to. If you've been there, the rooms where they used to be check rooms are gradually being restored by, now I'm forgetting their name, by Dutch architects, Herzog and de Meuron, who are very modernist architects who are restoring them, not necessarily meticulously to exactly how it was originally, because a lot of the rooms have been painted over, so they're not sure what was originally there. So they're being restored in the feeling of what was originally there. Now, I mean, they you know, the ceiling can be uncovered, but let's say if there's a painted panel here or wallpaper, they might not know what there was originally. But you are able to see, when they'll open up the armory for tours of the entire space, including the second floor, you have spaces that are representing, there's a room by Potier and Timus, there's a room by Herder Brothers, there's a room by Kimball and Cabus. These are the decorating firms that were famous in the late 19th century. So it's a great repository of the style that is not anything you would directly apply today, but you might want to be inspired by elements of it. These are just details of the veterans' room. Someone asked me this afternoon, and I didn't have a good answer to the question, why was this so elaborate if this was built as an armory? And I have to check on it, except that the armory, the drill hall, is the main hall, which is now used for entertainment and exhibitions and trade shows. The other rooms, I imagine, were meeting rooms for the officers and, you know, a dining hall for the officers. So it seems reasonable that rooms would have been decorated appropriately. This is a room you're going to see in the Brooklyn Museum, and it's wonderful. It's called the Rockefeller Smoking Room because at one time it was owned by John D. Rockefeller in his townhouse. However, it was originally done by Arabella Huntington, and one name before that. A young woman who married into one of the very wealthy Robert Brown families, married Mr. Huntington, who was one of the railroad barons. And then when he died, he was much, much older than she. She married his son or nephew. I think it was the nephew. So she had her name Huntington twice, which meant she was able to stay in the family townhouse. And when she did this room, or had this room done, when she sold the house to Rockefeller, he was either wise enough or crazy enough to keep this room, which was subsequently given to the Brooklyn Museum. What are we looking at here? Well, we are looking at elaborately, this is bright lacquer painted, or not 17 layers of Japanese lacquer, but high gloss paint. We are looking at Moorish decoration, a painted ceiling, wallpaper here, embroidered covering here, decoration that is drawn from, you know, could you say what style is this? You could pick out a whole lot of different elements in this, which is what makes it the exotic and, bless you, the period of the aesthetic movement. We sort of call the aesthetic movement is, you know, from, let's say, the mid-1870s on. Now, I wanted to tell you about one of the very famous houses, which is sort of typical of what was happening coming up Fifth Avenue. And you should know this because you're in New York, at least in New York now. People, once Fifth Avenue was starting to be more fashionable, New York got built further and further up. You were living downtown at first, in what is now, you know, the Wall Street area, the Lower East Side. Well, lots of people came in. you moved to a better neighborhood further away. You could have a little more land. You didn't have land around you. That wasn't what you did in the city. All the way uptown, where we are now, is farmland. But they started building mansions like this up Fifth Avenue. And even in my lifetime, I remember buildings being built. If you think of Fifth Avenue, there are a couple of tall apartment houses in the, let's say, the 60s. Yeah, in the 60s, tall apartment houses on Fifth Avenue. In order to build those tall apartment houses, so that was in the 70s and 80s, they were tearing down what was left over of these. I don't know who was living in places like that by then, but the remnants of this are Cartier, the building that Cartier's in on 54th and Fifth Avenue. The jeweler Cartier is one of the only remaining buildings that is pretty much as it was built in the 1800s. The building that Bendel's is in is similar but was changed a lot. And there have been others, but as I said, as things changed, people moved uptown, and we have leftover mansions. We have the Frick Collection Mansion. We have the Neue Gallery, which is in a building that was on the corner of 86th and Madison, not this style, but a later mansion. So that you know, until the early 20th century, considerably into the 20th century, people were living in townhouses like this. And the richest people were up Fifth Avenue. Then apartment houses began to be built. And this you'll get later, but you're not going to get it in this particular class. You'll get it in architecture. Buildings like the Dakota. Do any of you know the Dakota on 72nd Street and Central Park West? Was the first apartment house built in the city. It was a big deal. An apartment house or apartment hotels were built. You don't want to have to worry about your servants in 20 rooms. Move into a hotel. You could have a 15-room apartment or a 20-room apartment or a 10-room apartment. You'll have all the service. You can order from the restaurant downstairs. It became fashionable to live in an upscale hotel. Not like, they weren't for tourists. They were apartment hotels. But anyway, so this is Fifth Avenue, and this is just, I wanted you to know something of the lifestyle. You're going to see the Vanderbilt's country estate. But this is the kind of house they lived in the city. And the architect, Charles Atwood, did a lot of this kind of houses. You may see, the brownstones around townhouses in the East 60s and 70s. Some of them are pretty elaborate, not this elaborate, not this large. Certainly not this lavish inside. Most of these you're not going to see color because there was only black and white photography and drawings at the time. The interiors, as I said, the best of everything was by Herder Brothers. William Vanderbilt House is one of the most famous ones. It stayed intact for long enough for it to be photographed. There is a book called Artistic Houses. Now I've seen, the original is a portfolio that other places have. I think Cooper Hewitt has one. I've seen it in the Brooklyn Museum. It was like Architectural Digest for all the important people. You would have your house, it was great prestige to be included in Artistic Houses. And you flip through it and you see what the Gilded Age was like. The Gilded Age is the name that we give the era around, it's not a style, around towards the end of the century, the residences of the robber barons or the very wealthy industrialists. They weren't all robber barons. The people who made their money in talking about steel, coal and oil, railroads, not really department stores, banking. So we're talking about people, and most of them had a finger in several of these pots. These were people like the Rockefeller, like John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, I mentioned Huntington, I can't remember, Pulitzer, Frick. Frick was in, several of these were partners in various ventures together and then spun off. And so you see, if you ever read anything about any of these ventures,